Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to hear from our panelists about such a critical issue. I encourage all of you to look up our esteemed panelists in your either on the app or in your booklet. I'm just going to give them a very brief introduction so that we can get right to the interesting conversation that they're going to lead us to. And then a little bit before the end, I'd love to have an opportunity to take your questions so that you can ask the panelists what's on your mind. So on my far left, we have Jamie Merisotis. He's the president and CEO of Lumina. It's an Indianapolis-based group that's actually the largest funder of post-high school learning. And then we have Ellen Hughes-Cromwick. She's a consultant and former chief economist at the U.S. Department of Commerce. On my immediate left, I'm happy to welcome Shernaz Daver. She's the Chief Marketing Officer of Udacity, which is a for-profit online education company. On my immediate right, we have Alan Blue, the co-founder of LinkedIn. I assume many of you have heard of this, the business and employment social networking site. And then on my far right, we just heard a video that is from Art Bilger's organization called WorkingNation. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have Ellen help kick us off to really put the problem into context. So Ellen, after your tenure working with the Department of Commerce, put the scope of the problem that we're talking about into context. How many people are we reaching nationwide in retraining programs, and how does that match with the demand for retraining? Tell us a little bit about the numbers, and then beyond telling us about the problem, give us a little picture of success. I know you think many of the solutions have to emerge locally to properly address issues with sensitivity. So give us at least one great example so that we can understand what success looks like.
Okay, great. Thanks for kicking it off. Really appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session. This is a really important topic. And I just want to highlight, there have been, I think, if I counted right, 7 panels over the last couple of days that touch on this topic. So I don't want to silo our messages to you without kind of commenting on what we heard as well over the course of the last 24 hours. Stats. Well, the stats are dismal. I'm an economist. What did you expect? You know, there are nearly 2 million people who are super underemployed, i.e. they've been out of the workforce for over half a year. Has anybody here been unemployed for 90 days? It's depressing. And I will tell you, again, the statistics that Alan Kruger presented yesterday are very sobering. Those people that are unemployed, they don't have access to training or any sort of support network to get them back in the labor force, are on meds. These are people that have pain and suffering. And you know, the statistics are very, very sobering. This is a call to all of us, hands on deck. And so I want to tell you a little bit, if I can, you know, you asked about what programs. There are lots and lots of training programs available. You can go to any state and you'll see a workforce development program. You'll see some federal money. You'll see some state money, some local money coming in to support and provide some resources to get people employable. And I think one of the kind of interesting aspects to what the Obama administration did was to say, let's look at the 49 programs. Yes, there are 49 programs, training programs, federal government. Let's sort of look at it holistically and say, what do we need to do to make sure that these are effective tools, that they actually turn the key to get people into jobs on a sustained basis, not just for the next 3 months, for the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and give them some mobility and sustainability. So the Department of Commerce was charged with implementing some of these new ways of providing support for training, and they did it using evidence-based research. And they looked specifically at what skill gaps there were. Secretary Pritzker went out and talked to hundreds of CEOs. You know, what are you missing? Where are we missing it? You know, why aren't the programs, whether they're provided at the local, the state, the federal level, where are the gaps? And they've discovered that, you know, our training programs were supply push. They weren't, you know, hey, what's growing in the economy? Where's the demand pull? And how do we match up the skills to what the economy needs to grow and prosper? And so they launched, you know, some really tight-knit programs under the rubric Skills for Business, but it involved several different elements. One was manufacturing partnership programs and this apprenticeship program effort. And I want to come back to that in a minute, so you can circle to somebody else, but stay tuned. I want to talk to you a little bit about apprenticeship programs and why that's important.
Okay. Alan, I'd like to turn to you. Now that we have a bit of the landscape, I think we should get you in on the conversation, because by running one of the nation's largest social networks, you see a lot across a whole bunch of industries in people's profiles. So from your vantage point, tell us a little bit about the nation's training infrastructure, what's being done by your company to connect individuals on the site with both employers and educators. And if you would, please detail a program or two to put people in the room with the services that are actually being provided.
Sure. So LinkedIn is, right now we represent about 500 million people around the world. So we've got a lot of data about what people do and sort of where they came from, where they got trained, what their skills are. We know a lot about how skills have changed over time. I mean, the video we saw at the beginning is a perfect example of how quickly the world of skills is actually changing. That speed is actually something which is getting in the way of our ability to do effective training for people. We were talking about on the way in, there's a real lag when basically the training provider becomes aware of what skills are actually necessary. And the world of work is changing faster than that lag. Right now it probably takes 8 or 9 years for a skill to find its way from employers into the ONET database and then back up into training programs. But the skills actually turn over in less than 9 years. So basically, we're in kind of a bad situation in terms of that feedback loop. The interesting thing is, I think this is actually a problem that can be solved. You mentioned apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are super important, but there are so many providers out there doing interesting things in small places. I can tell you a story. A few years ago, this was in 2012, I was sitting on a panel with a community college president, and that community college president basically said, "I've solved the skills gap problem in my area." And I asked him how, and he said that basically he had gone out and talked to all the employers nearby, found out what they needed to hire, and then basically developed curricula to train those things. It seems very straightforward, but the amazing thing is every time this employer-educator relationship happens, great things result. So this guy was able to go from the place where 20 or 30% of his students were getting jobs to the place where 80 or 90% of them were actually getting jobs. And that was in all kinds of industries, nursing, advanced manufacturing, lots of stuff. If we could figure out a way to make that system common everywhere and to be open about the different types of solutions you can put in place. Apprenticeships, you put in traditional training, online training, coding boot camps, internships, a huge variety of possibilities, and tons of things we haven't thought about. I think this is a problem that we could actually solve. LinkedIn's going to play a big role in this, or we certainly intend to. And I don't know if I should go into it now, but I'm just going to throw it out there. We're doing a pilot right now in Denver, and actually in the whole state of Colorado, and in Phoenix, where basically we're trying to close that communication loop between employers and educators. And it's called Skillful. If you want to go look at it, go skillful.com. And basically what it does is it says every time basically an employer agrees that they will interview somebody if they've passed a certain training program. And that sounds really simple, but that's information that simply isn't available out there. That feedback loop, that willingness for an employer and educator to work together, actually makes a huge difference, because it means that the person who's looking for a job knows that if they finish that training program, it's going to lead them someplace, which is something that hasn't actually been available up to this point. So you know the dollars you spend on training are going to be dollars well spent. And educators know what needs to be trained, which is something that hasn't really existed, at least not in a quick feedback loop before. So I'll leave it there. So
Terrific, thank you. Jamie, I want to circle over to you. With Lumina's focus on increasing America's success in higher education, what do you see happening with technology and online delivery models of retraining? And are there national models? Since before Ellen was talking about local ones, national models, or does it really have to be local solutions, as Ellen was talking about?
Yeah, let's go back to Ellen's point, I think, about the demand pull that she called, because I think that's really important to understand. That demand pull is really overwhelmingly about a single word. It's talent, right? Talent is what America needs to be successful in the 21st century. If you need any evidence of that, just look at the projections, labor force projections. 2/3 of the jobs being created today require post-high school learning. If you look at what happened in the period between the end of the recession in early 2011 and the middle of last year, 11.6 million jobs were created in the American economy. 11.5 million of those new jobs went to people with an associate degree or higher. So it's very clear that we have a talent problem and a rising demand for talent in the country, and we've got to meet that demand. Now, that demand historically has been met mostly by colleges and universities, and we're certainly going to need to do that going forward. But we're now living in a different ecosystem, I think, an ecosystem where you have direct-to-consumer opportunities, workplace-based learning, and lots of other ways in which you can get high-quality outcomes, results that matter both to your work, to your job, and to your life. And as we start to think about that new ecosystem, we've really got to think about how technology can play a role in mediating that process. And there's lots of examples. Skillful is a very good example of one that I think we're interested in. Shernaz will talk about their idea about this massive platforms like Udacity, which I think hold great potential. I'll mention a couple of others as examples where both within and outside the traditional learning infrastructure, we've seen some ideas that are national in scope. One is actually one based out of Southern New Hampshire University. Now, Southern New Hampshire University, you'd say, how can that be a national model? Well, Southern New Hampshire University is basically a hedge. So they've got their campus in Manchester, New Hampshire, and it's sort of like, where I went to. It's a leafy liberal arts campus, lovely place. But they've also got an online program, and from the online program, they actually spun something called College for America, which is actually a B2B platform where you learn based on a competency-based model. And in the competency-based model, it doesn't matter how much time it takes you. You have to demonstrate competency in order to get that Southern New Hampshire credential. And they've built these relationships with employers like Anthem and others in order to actually help dramatically increase the opportunities for their employees. You can see those kind of models either through College for America or others quickly getting scale, right? Where you can actually deliver through employers the kinds of learning that we need. You could also think about how we actually recognize what people know and are able to do by looking at different kinds of platforms. LinkedIn's got all kinds of potential. And there's interesting entrepreneurial efforts out there to try to do similar things. One that I would mention is called Credly. Credly is one that's actually essentially trying to recognize and aggregate your badges, your certificates, your certifications, whatever it may be, into new kinds of recognized credentials that have real labor market value. And so I think what we're seeing is a change in the market. The monopoly of higher education, as we would call it, is really over. Colleges and universities are still going to play a very important role. But my view is that there's an exciting new world. Technology is going to be a part of it. And that post-secondary learning ecosystem is really what we need to focus on.
Terrific. You lead right into what I want to talk to Shernaz about. This is obviously your area of expertise at Udacity. I'd like you to tell us a little bit about how you are reaching people to convince them to change the conceptual framework that learning now must be a lifelong process. It's no longer good enough to sort of check the box that we've graduated from college or university, And so tell us how you think about that.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I totally agree with a lot of the points that were made. So what we do at Udacity is college is absolutely important, exactly like Jamie said. But we always have this archaic belief that you're done learning when you're 22. And that's just not possible. There is just no way. I can guarantee that most of you in this room are a little bit older than 22 or a lot older than 22, and you're still learning. And what we're forgetting is that the process of learning is going to be lifelong. And the reason that it's happening this way is a couple of factors. One is we're living longer because of healthier lifestyles. Two is we're going to have to work longer. Social security is not going to cover us. And three is technology is disrupting every industry, from health to transportation to government. And the best way to look at this is we can use technology that is disrupting every industry to make it better for us and to keep learning. So at Udacity, we have this belief that we want to be the place to learn, to get a job. So just as Ellen mentioned on the apprenticeship model, and Alan talked about the skills, we want to make sure that we give people the skills they have to get a job. So we have a nano degree that's a micro-credential. You can do it on your own time because you generally tend to not be able to devote all of your time to doing a nano degree because you have a family, you have a job. And the idea is at the end of it, you either get a new job or you get promoted or you learn a new skill. And today in our program, we have about 25,000 people doing these nano degrees. And one of the things we do is we work with industry-leading companies like Google, Amazon, IBM, Facebook to get the skills that they want in jobs. So when you're going through a nano degree and it's a Google nano degree, you're learning about Android in what they want their Android developer to be. So it's not a professor sitting in the classroom who is very, very far away from Google. It's somebody right at Google telling you, this is the API we want for our maps, and that's what you need to learn. And to Alan's point that he was making, where there's such a big gap from when there are new things in technology, how do you kind of concentrate that gap? That's what we do. So we have a nano degree in the self-driving car. That was a little bit in that film. We have 7,000 people going through that nano degree program. There is no place in the world today that you can actually learn an entire curriculum on self-driving cars. And just to put it in perspective, 7,000 people is more than the entire undergraduate population of Carnegie Mellon, which is one of the best robotics schools. So there is a way to think about this that says we have to change the way we look at learning and what it means. We have about 50 employers right now that are willing to look at our graduates and say, we're going to fast track them. BMW, Mercedes, Amazon, Google, Nest, all of these people come together. And instead of throwing out a bunch of stats, I thought I'd kind of summarize and just give you two examples. So we have a woman called Ravelli. She's out of Texas. She's a mom. She has a master's in computer science. It means she should be able to get any job she wants, theoretically, in the world at a very high salary. But she stepped out of the workforce to take care of her kids. So she lost a few skills. She lost a few of the parts of being in a job. She came out, she decided, let me take a nano degree, and she just got a job at Intuit and is starting at the end of the month. These are the stories that actually resonate almost with the mission of this conference of building meaningful lives. She can now go in, she can have economic independence, and that's what she's going to do. Aaron is another person. He worked at AT&T for 18 years. He does not have the ability to quit his job and say, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to go to a dorm. And if you're 18 years older than most people, you're not going to go back to college. So AT&T has a tremendous program where they have decided to upscale almost their entire workforce. So Randall Stevenson and John Donovan, of which AT&T is a big partner for us, have said we're going to upscale our workers instead of firing them all and hiring new people. That's not how you build a company for generations. So over half of their workforce has gone through some kind of reskilling. And Aaron is one of those people who went through a program that we offer in the web space and landed a promotion, got a job with a better salary and more skills that he could use. And he is generally what we would call a middle-aged person. So there's a lot of ways that we can think about lifelong learning if we understand what the lens is and change the way we generally look at it.
Terrific, thank you. Art, I'd like to bring you in on the conversation. I know that you work with all of the different groups that are up on this panel, as well as many more, but obviously you're concerned that the needle's not moving fast enough. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the most exciting program that you're working with now that's different from some way from what we've already been hearing up here, and if you could, of course, be specific to name names and give some credit to the educators and companies that you really see as leading the way.
Thank you very much. Yes, I will do that, but I think I'm going to provide a little bit of background because we've jumped right into the solutions piece of this, which is critical. But we at WorkingNation are really playing, and the reason we're working with all of these people is we're playing a different role. We're not creating solutions. One, we identified this as an issue dating back probably 3+ years ago. And what the issue was, globalization. It came to me one night, actually at a dinner filled with people like this in New York. And the concept of globalization, technology, longevity, and broken education all coming together at the same time, like never before in history, had provided the opportunity for a potential massive structural unemployment issue. I began talking to very knowledgeable people across the country, and the awareness of this issue was very limited. But what I also learned as I crisscrossed the country, and I've literally been doing this for 3 years, is that there are actually a lot of solutions out there, but they don't have much visibility. And so what we finally concluded, and we pulled a team of people together, is our job at WorkingNation, and this is a not-for-profit that we set up, is to create awareness across the country amongst, from the most knowledgeable people, foundations, et cetera, to just the average American across the country, as to these issues that are coming upon us so quickly. And then, through storytelling, highlight where the solutions are. And obviously, that's how I've met all the people up here. And what we did is our strategy is pulling together we have TV producers, Academy Award-winning documentarians, journalists, all working on this. And if you go check out WorkingNation.com, which is our website, you will see much of the stuff that has been produced. We launched this in September, and the sole goal is to highlight the awareness, but then educate the population as to where the jobs of the future will be and what are the mitigating strategies. Now, as to solutions, clearly some of the most interesting ones are sitting right here. That's why I knocked on their doors and said, hey, we're going to have a panel here. But other things that are pretty interesting, which an example we filmed just recently, we haven't put it up yet, an organization called PHI National. It is a not-for-profit in New York that trains home healthcare workers. That will be one of the biggest, if not the biggest growth job in the next 10 years, purely by demographics. And we can't fill those millions of jobs. And so we met the organization, actually JP Morgan Chase was the ones that introduced me to the organization. It's a fantastic organization. Again, that piece will be up on our website and you'll be able to see it. So that's,
Terrific.
A great example of some. And I should say, healthcare is probably the biggest industry where jobs and retraining would be, whether it's at that level, home healthcare, or at the much more sophisticated data and analytics type levels.
Terrific. Thank you. Ellen, let's bring you back in and let's discuss the incentive structure, the incentives that drive the decision making, and what you really think you need to see for all three groups, the individuals, the employers, and the educators, to not only address the skills gap piecemeal, but to engage in a holistic solution.
Right, and I think the audience, this will resonate with you that our market system has some failure modes. We would like to think that the market out there is really efficient and it's allocating resources so that we don't end up with underutilized people that are out of jobs, or underutilized capital. For any of you who have been to China recently, you will see a lot of underutilized capital. Well, we would expect that perhaps. They don't have a lot of market signals. They're trying to create them, and they have them in certain sectors. Come back here to the US, our market system has some ambiguities in it, and the incentives are not clear, crystal clear. And so we, and particularly, I've got to say, employers, to their credit, are trying to follow the right signals in order to make sure they've got the optimal level of, and number of workers, and that they're tip-top trained. Unfortunately, that's not really where we are. And I think part of it is that if you're an employer, you're going to train to some degree, and then you may say, gee, if I train too much, I'm spending all this money, and then the individual might leave. Or I don't have an incentive to take that Ford worker in the Dearborn stamping plant and keep him or her trained on a continuous basis, because you know what? Robots are coming in. If anybody's ever been to a stamping plant, when you look at tool and dies that are imported from China, there are, a handful of workers in a plant that is 3 football fields long. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that the incentive structure is not going to produce the optimal outcome with regard to our people and the jobs and the work to keep them in the workforce on a sustainable basis. So we have some market failures, and in Econ 101, when you read about public economics, if you have a market failure, there's a role for some intervention to try to help. And that's why you saw in the US over many, many years, I'm going back to when I was at the Council of Economic Advisors in the Reagan administration, we tried to do a lot with the job training and assistance program, but it wasn't sustainable, it wasn't enough. And as I mentioned in the intro, now we have 47 programs. Pick your flavor. Go out and Google training programs and see what you get, and see if you can actually, if you've got a neighbor who's unemployed or somebody. It is very hard. It's like a needle in a haystack to try to find and help folks who are in this position. So we have a lot of work to do in it, and we all have to do it together. So the incentive for us is that you want a purpose in life, and you want to make sure that you're giving back. And so that's that's kind of my passionate plea to everybody here to find a way to get engaged in this and move the ball down the court.
Yeah, so, and I mean, definitely have to echo that. So in addition to those 3 primary users, if you will, of the system, the 3 primary members, the individual who's looking for the job, the employer who will employ them, the educator who's going to train them, there are at least 2 others. There's probably at least 2 others that we need to consider. You just mentioned both of them. So the first one is the government. So government has a role to play in terms of adjusting incentive structures, making sure that we make good choices about how we're spending our tax dollars, about how we're setting our tax policy, about how we're, the kinds of programs that we actually need to run. So far, we have encountered great support, primarily at this point at the local and state levels. There are a lot of governors in the United States, and there are a lot of governments around the world that are interested in attacking this problem. And the ones who are closest to the ground are the ones who are most interested in actually attacking it. So whether it's Manchester, England, or the mayor of New York City, or the country of Singapore, which is only 5 million people, all of them are extremely proactive in terms of trying to address the problem. They need the signaling system as well in order to figure out what they would actually do. Yeah. And the other really interesting piece, you just mentioned at the end there, a super important component of making the solution work is other people, the people who help us navigate these things as they go along. Most job seekers, myself included, despite my background, I went to an elite college and all that stuff, I really had no idea what to do when I got into the job market. No idea at all. And if I didn't have any idea, then I can guarantee there are hundreds of millions of people around the world who have no idea how to navigate. This role the role for churches, the role for placement centers, the role for volunteers, the role for neighbors, the role for family members is huge in attacking this. So these are all fantastic opportunities for people who are working in any of these 5 roles to participate in an overall system which would allow us to attack the problem and have quick responses to what the future actually looks like. So there's lots of opportunities, and a little bit of creativity goes a long way in attacking these things.
Thank you, Alan. Shernaz, I was hoping you would jump in.
No, I have to echo 2 things that you said. One is you're absolutely right on local government. In fact, today we're actually talking about a program that we're doing with Reno. And it really came from market forces. Reno's entire local governors, everyone kind of, particularly EDON, which is the Economic Development Advisory Committee for Western Nevada, has decided that they will reduce unemployment. So in the last few years, they've reduced unemployment from 15% to 4%, and they have convinced companies to move up to Nevada. So Google is there, Amazon is there, Tesla is there. Now that these companies have come there, they're going, okay, give us the workers. So Reno's going, okay, that's a problem, but we can solve this problem if we can retrain workers in Nevada. So Udacity is coming in with them. We're kind of the part that fills that hole for them. We're doing an online and in-person intensive program called Udacity Connect in different jobs, starting with web development, and these people will then get employed by these companies. And that's kind of where that local loop comes in, where there is a need, exactly to what the 2 of you said, that says, okay, we have a problem, let's go figure it out. And we're hoping that Reno becomes a showcase for us, and we can do this in similar areas. One of the other areas we're looking at is Columbus, Ohio, or anything like that, such that all of these topics we're talking about are not just affected with the coast, Silicon Valley and New York, and nothing is in between, because the recent election has proven there is a lot in between, and we need to figure that out.
Utah is doing a great job. Colorado is doing a great job. North Carolina, Rhode Island, like all of them have great programs or on their way to building great programs.
I have to say one thing on navigating, and this is a story that connects to LinkedIn. One of the things we find with our students is they come in and they do all the code, but then they don't know how to navigate the job area, and they're super nervous. People forget that when you are 38 years old and you want to change jobs, it's not easy at all. You are more scared and less confident than when you were an 18-year-old kid in college, and you're more fearful. So one of these very simple things we did for people is we took all our nano-degree graduates and we had an event in March, and we said, we're going to take a photograph of you by a professional photographer with a makeup artist so you can put it up on LinkedIn. It was just this very simple step that said, you will feel more confident putting up your photo on LinkedIn. And we had a line circling the entire ballroom. The most popular thing out of that entire event was the photography session. Not Google talking, not all of these great people, none of it. Not even the job interviews. It was just the act of somebody saying, you look good, and you're going to put up your photo on LinkedIn so you can get a job, worked miraculously. And that's kind of that 5th point you made up, where it isn't per se an entity that does this, but if you can understand where the individual is coming from, you can definitely make sure you're connecting with them.
Terrific. Thank you, Jamie. I want to bring you back in here. What do you think is necessary to not only provide people with the mental tools we've been talking about to engage in lifelong learning, but also to ensure that our workforce reflects the diversity of our population?
Yeah, I think Alan's point about the different roles of the players in this talent ecosystem is really, really important, because part of the market failures that Cheryl was talking about really have to do with the fact that we've done a poor job of lifting up people who have historically been at the bottom, right? Historically underserved populations, people of color, low income, immigrant, first generation populations, and giving them the opportunity that they need to be successful in work and in life. And I mean, the data, I like to match Art's incredible ability of storytelling with our ability on the data side, and we can have a great marriage, because my view is that if you think about the ways in which we have failed those populations, so today 45% of whites have an associate degree or higher, 29% of Americans, 21% of Latinos. If you look at what does that mean in real terms, people with bachelor's degree earn 57% of all the wages earned in the United States. So if you want to have a path to the middle class, your ability to get that path has got to be through higher levels of post-secondary learning. And we've got to actually have a coordinated, cohesive plan, bringing together all of those actors in order to be able to do that. Part of the market failure has been the colleges and universities. They haven't done a good enough job. Part of the market failure has been government. It hasn't sort of created, it's invested, but it hasn't created the incentives for success as part of that. And part of that is the private sector, which I think has a sort of enlightened self-interest to do more and do better in terms of its own investments. But I think this coordinated strategy, thinking about this in a way where all of the actors understand that the goal of the system has to be more and better talent, is really important. This is not about a production function where you get an education, then you go get a job, and then you retire. It doesn't work that way anymore. As Shernaz pointed out, this whole idea of lifelong learning is real. We see people who lost their life savings and their life opportunities in that last recession. Those jobs did not come back. We are in a different labor market than we ever were before. And for those populations, those diverse populations who are our fastest growing, we've actually got to target those populations in these efforts. We've got to put our thumb on the scale of making sure that they are more successful than they have been in the past. We can't leave them behind going forward.
Thank you. Art, let's bring you back in here. You know, if you were to sort of look out in the future, you're hearing some very interesting opportunities, but as you said, your finger is on the pulse sort of across all of them. What do you think is the likelihood, let's say a decade from now, if all this stuff works, that everyone who wants the opportunity to work will actually be able to do so?
I think it's, I was asked recently to blog on the GE website on exactly this subject, and my answer there was, who knows? Because you know, that first piece, that video piece that we showed at the beginning here, is called Slope of the Curve. And the reason we named it Slope of the Curve was because we are sitting here today with the slope of the curve of changes in jobs and skills when measured against time has never been so steep before in our lives. And it's because of all those variables coming together. Now, yes, we are creating awareness, and clearly people are working very actively at it. But one, again, this is part of why we at WorkingNation are doing what we're doing. We must spread this through this knowledge through 325 million people across this country. Actually, Jamie made mention of you know, other markets. It just so happens last week, Univision came to us and asked us to dub our Slope of the Curve piece into Spanish, so they can show it across their platforms. So that marketplace can get more. This audience is pretty knowledgeable, but there are a lot of audiences out there that are not knowledgeable. So the critical thing in terms to your question about what we can get done in 10 years is really how fast can we move on these various fronts. And it was discussed a fair amount. Most of the solutions are local. That's clearly our argument. And the solutions are corporations, not-for-profits, academic entities, and local government in different combinations working together. And the ideas are out there. I really do believe, and this goes far beyond just this group of people here. But how quickly, in a country of 325 million people, where we have all kinds of other stuff grabbing us and slowing us down. And so, you know, that's really what we're trying to do, to increase the probability that in 10 years there are jobs out there to match up with the population.
Great, Ellen.
I think a lot of it is policy. I think government does play a big role. I think Ellen was talking about it. And I think regardless of where you stand, whether you're red or you're blue, everybody's going to agree education is important. Yeah. I mean, that's just a fact, and retraining is important. And the good thing, at least on lifelong learning or looking at alternative education and credentials, Kasich is talking about it. Ben Sasse, who's one of the, from Nebraska, is talking about it. Clinton's talking about it. So everyone at least is talking about it, which I can say we had 2 years ago. And I think that, in my world, which I tend to be a little bit more optimistic, I'm hoping that that kind of changes things too, and people see things differently.
I think that's, yeah, I just want to follow up on what Art said and what you said, because I was at Ford Motor Company for a long part of my career, and this morning, I don't know if anybody went to the innovation on autonomous vehicle technology, fascinating discussion. And if you look at the technology that Ford has, for example, now, or Google on Waymo, this is a nonlinear curve. We're not going to be able to predict it accurately. There's a range of error around that curve. However, we're not going to have people in the steel plant next to Dearborn Assembly, stoking the fire for the hood of the vehicles, or they're not going to be melting the aluminum and scrapping it and recycling. I mean, there is a significant transformation of transportation that's on the horizon. And again, we can't predict exactly when, but we're going to be moving up to level 4 vehicles, which are, say, high degree of automation. Well, a vehicle today has 20,000 components. That vehicle will have a fraction of the components that a conventional vehicle has today. And so we have got to get ready now. That's why I said there's a sense of urgency here. We can't play around with, kindergarten public policy. We can't play around with a bunch of silo programs that aren't, sort of linked together and, really based on a firm, brain food kind of pyramid of understanding. We've really got to get going. And the competition globally, by the way, is incredible because China already has 9 proving grounds for autonomous vehicles. And that's one of the key ingredients. I mean, you got to have your proving grounds up and running and moving so that you're going to get the tech, you're going to get the software development, the R&D, in all of, that whole package. Well, we have to get that package because we need whatever jobs that will come out of that new technology.
Given that policy, though, moves so slowly, I was going to come to you anyway to ask you, are you concerned about greater political instability out of this? And if so, what kind of measures should we be talking about as a country that potentially protect people as they are trying to enter into these retraining opportunities and finding jobs? I know Finland recently passed the universal based income, for example. Are these some of the kinds of policy issues that also should come to the table now?
Yeah, I would love to hear what Art and Alan have to say about that topic because I think you're kind of on the front end of a lot of those issues. I'll just say humbly from my vantage point that we have policy leadership. We have a way to get there if we can bring, have a united front. I mean, the data are pretty clear. So I'm optimistic that we can get there. But we have to go through this 3-step process: awareness, engagement, and then action. And we have to bring people together. So it's on us to do it. Nobody's going to do it for us. We have to be the leaders together. So I'm going to defer to our 2 experts down here at the end of the panel.
As far as UBI and specific government programs, I think there's a tremendous reason to research those things and understand how they would actually work. It is clear that when you actually put all the pieces together, you're going to have needs for stuff like that. Like you mentioned, for instance, there are students who would love to go out and spend, I'm going to take 6 months off and learn how to do whatever. But you just can't do that if you work at AT&T and you got a family to feed. You can't take the time off. So the question is, if it becomes necessary to do that at scale, how could the government step in and make that easier to sort of work with the system? I think one of the key takeaways from I think, from everything we're saying here, is that there is not going to be a coordinated strategy to attack this problem. This is going to be a networked approach. And everybody's going to act in their own best interest, and we just need to make sure that when they act in their own best interest, it helps. I had a great conversation. I'm reminded by the uniform. I had a great conversation with Ash Carter, who was the outgoing Secretary of Defense, and he has to consider not only how do we get people into the military, but also that people leave the military. And when they leave the military, like, what do they go do? What do our veterans go and do? And the way he put it was that basically he said, I want the military not only to be a great place to go to, but I want the military to be a great place to come from. Okay? That attitude, that thought that you're going to bring people in, you're not going to hold on to them forever, but you're going to take care of them while they're there, and you're going to prepare them for the next step, is all in the interest of the defense of the United States, the military, making sure that we're prepared for all the threats that we need to face, but at the same time, doing so in a way which fits beautifully with an ecosystem where you can educate, where you can pay for people's education, where you can retrain people as they move out. It's just one of hundreds of thousands of examples of how an ecosystem with a little bit of help and a little bit of coordination, operating locally, can actually attack the problem and solve it. We don't know what all the solutions are going to have to be at this point, but if we pay attention to what we're doing, we can figure them out as we go along.
All right, so I want to press pause for one moment. I certainly have more questions left,
Oh, yeah.
but in looking at the clock, I really want you guys to get some of your questions answered. So do we have some questions from the group for the next few minutes, and then I'll begin to wrap up the panel. Please speak into the microphone when you ask a question, and please say your name so that the panelists can acknowledge you.
Hi there, Rick Newman with Yahoo Finance. So all these success stories make it sound like how could there possibly be a problem? But we know there is it's not so much an unemployment problem, but an underemployment problem. My question is, does anybody have a sense for why programs such as these are not reaching people who are ready to work and want these jobs, and how much of the problem might be people who are unemployed or underemployed and don't want these jobs, or else don't want to do what it takes to get these jobs, including pass a drug test?
Yeah. Let me address that. Again, the awareness as to these issues and the solutions is fairly limited out there. And yes, much more dialogue has begun in recent times, and clearly, as I sent my team an email after the morning after the election, that I said our job as to creating awareness has gotten easier, but now we really must drive the whole solution side of it much more aggressively. But one of the issues, and we found ourselves in the middle of the Carrier Corporation situation in Indianapolis. We had conducted a roundtable with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce as a partner, and got into the whole discussion using the Carrier situation as a triggering point for this roundtable of 6 experts. It really created some ideas for our team to go off and begin working with carrier workers and the union, the corporation, et cetera. One of the things we discovered, at least for the moment, many of the workers were more comfortable with the idea of being unemployed than the idea of being re-educated and re-skilled. And I must say, I was initially surprised when the team came back and said that. And hopefully, that can be overcome down the road. But that's one of the big issues here, and that's why you have a significant amount of underemployment.
Can I just jump on this for a second to just add to what Ard said, because I think that's really important. And this is one of the major issues of why uniform basic income, I think, is a red herring. I'm very worried that we're going to go down this path of a conversation about basic income when fundamentally it does nothing to recognize the value of human work. Human work is very important. Satisfaction in work is extremely important to people's sense of well-being, their optimism, their ability to perform well in their families. There's all kinds of research evidence associated with that. And so I'm worried about that conversation about UBI at a time when, as Americans, unlike some of these Scandinavian countries, we have a very diverse economy. And in a very diverse economy, we've actually got to create lots of different opportunities, that network that Alan was talking about, in order to be successful. So part of it is to create a much more diverse set of opportunities for people. And part of it, to get back to your question, I think, is to make sure that we actually meet those people where they are and tell them, no, unemployment is not a satisfactory outcome. Collecting unemployment is not a satisfactory outcome for your life. Here's what you can do if you get more skill, more training, more education, and as you move up that ladder, you'll get greater rewards personally and professionally.
Purpose in life, that's a theme that we are constantly putting forward. Purpose in life, as we keep people alive for an extra 5, 10, 15, 20 years,
I'm hoping for 25.
20 me too. Yeah. Me too. We have seen just recently. We saw statistics for the first time in a very long period of time. The life expectancy of white males has begun to decline. Now, I can't give you all the answers for that, but my gut tells me there's something tied to that. There's 16% of the white working age males in this country who are either unemployed, underemployed, or have withdrawn from the workforce. That's a staggering number for a point in time when we're only getting going on this whole set of issues. So I do think this whole purpose is a very important piece of the equation, and we've got to develop systems and tools that could help facilitate that.
Thank you. I see we have a question over here. Oh, who's got the microphone? Whoever does, just please stand up. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nia Morrison. I run the Council for Economic Education. I'm in the K-12 space. So first, I want to thank all of you because I think this is one of the first times I've seen an entire group of people who are looking at cross-sector solutions to things. And I think that's huge. I came from the private sector. I know this panel is about retraining, but I'm wondering if, since we've got all the right people here, you could take a half a step back because many of the same issues confront kids who are barely graduating from high school or dropping out of high school and need to go back into the workforce. They have that moment where they realize it's time. And I've been hearing a lot of talk about kids who've been in the criminal justice system, et cetera. So they're facing a lot of the same challenges. And in particular for Udacity, how are you addressing the challenges of kids who are either haven't graduated, have had some turns in their path, have maybe just finished their GRE, but need to get trained and get the right skills to get jobs?
So we tend to believe in democratizing education, though our target market really is someone who's kind of older. Generally our audience is from 28 to 65 is the way I look at it, just because everybody has to go through lifelong learning. We do have a fair amount of high school kids in our system who'll just take the nano degree and they'll do an intro to programming. It's a class we again announced on Monday with a new price cut. And overall with it, they'll just get into coding and then they'll become a front-end web developer, which is an easy task to be in because all you're doing is creating websites, which might be difficult for a lot of us, but in general, that's something that you can do. So we do have that overall that they can go ahead and do. In fact, we have a 12-year-old kid who just took our Android developer class. Just because there is an ability, when we talk a lot about personalized learning, people are at different levels. And you may not have done really well in an academic system in high school because you didn't like the rigor or you didn't like the social stuff. But you're probably really good at coding, you might be. And if we're in an economy where it really is more of a prove-it economy versus anything else, and you're going further on merit, then you have the ability to do that. And that's what we offered them.
Thank you.
Joel Garrison, United States Army. You might have seen a bunch of my uniformed peers walking around. We're part of a group called the Military Leadership Circle, which is sponsored by the Milken Institute. Anyway, my question may actually be beyond the panel here, but Art, it may be something for you to put on your plate and think about. But imagine you probably already have. Who owns all of that? Who makes the money off of the automated taxi cab drivers, the factories that don't employ humans anymore? And how does that affect the social dynamics going forward?
That's an easy one.
Ellen might have an opinion on this too.
What's going to happen is I really do believe lots of new jobs are actually going to be created in many of these same entities. So I'll give you an example. I think one of the biggest areas of job growth in the next, let's say, 10 years or so is the whole area of data and analytics. And you're talking about, the example I use all the time, a marketing department of 10 will become a marketing department of 2, and you'll get better answers. But those other 8 jobs were middle class or upper middle class, reasonably well educated people. But at the same time, I don't believe there's an aspect of business, government, or the not-for-profit world that will not be driven by data and analytics. That's an area I have been very involved, and I'm very involved at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And my wife and I were the founding funders of the whole analytics program dating back to '08. And the Wharton School now has just created a major in the area of data and analytics. And in September, when it was launched, when those people who could choose a major for the first time, or had to choose, 20% chose that major. So on the one hand, to your point, yes, things will be disappearing, but other things will be appearing, and that's why I'm not quite sure how to then give you the answer on that. And it really goes back to the question originally of where will we be in 10 years?
I just think it kind of goes with the part of agriculture. You know, 1900s, 80% of the
Right.
society worked in agriculture. By the 1950s, with mechanization, it was down to 3%. Of course, we all went into the factories. So we're kind of anticipating us all going into these more human-centric jobs of the future. So, you know, the idea is, where's the capital going to come from to drive those type of jobs?
One possible answer, Bill Gates suggested we tax the robots, and I know this sounds like a crazy idea, but think about in the corporate tax structure. Think about in the corporate tax structure that we could actually create coefficients in the corporate tax structure so that you actually create incentives for employers to hire humans to do human work, right? So you create some extra value for employers to do that, particularly in industries where we recognize that the human element, human services, health, other areas like that require compassion, all the other things that humans can provide. I actually don't think it's such a crazy idea. I know the robots aren't going to be crazy about the idea, but I'm telling you.
Well, it's a curious one. I mean,
it's a fascinating notion.
Yeah, and I think, you know, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater in the following sense that we don't want to have unintended consequences flourish because we're using one policy tool to, you know, really address something over here. So I kind of come back to, you know, what Alan was saying earlier, that, you know, this is something that really grows out of the partnerships that we're going to develop, that in some of which already exist between government leaders, business leaders, nonprofits. You know, you're not going to be able to mastermind the future of work and say, oh, I've got this, you know, kind of great predictive power of how this is all going to play out. And I'll give you an example. I don't know if you're aware, at Fort Bragg, just here's an example. At Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the first program ever where the economic development group in the region combined with the community college, they're moving on to the base to help, you know, a lot of your colleagues in the Army who are going to be coming out, and instead of waiting for them to hit the street, they're saying, you know, let's start working on this 6, 9, 12 months before you're out so that we can talk to you and make you aware of different career paths, different training programs. Terrific. So it's part of this new program they're calling Bright Spot, if you want to Google it. But I mean, you know, that's the kind of percolation that I think then we want to, you know, make sure we move it out into
I think that's
different
terrific,
areas.
and there's certainly a lot of universities that are actively recruiting military members. I teach at Columbia Business School, and they have a very rising veteran population that's been just great to see on campus. I want to thank everybody here for coming. I know you probably have more questions for our panelists, so I'd like to encourage you to come up and ask them. I also realized that I never introduced myself, so I would like to invite all of you. Now, I have my very first book signing over in the pavilion. I've written a book on decision making. It's called Problem Solved. As we navigate the future of work, there are so many decisions that we all need to make personally and professionally, and I'd love an opportunity to say hello to you and to see you in the pavilion. So thank you all so very much for coming today and for sharing this time with us on this important topic. Thank you.